Matthew Parks. He's the Parliamentary Liaison Officer for COSATU, the Congress of South African Trade Union. Matthew, good morning to you. How worried are you about this situation? Many of your members, many of your worker members could perhaps lose their jobs.
Good morning. Thanks for having us. So we're quite worried. We have about 500,000 South African jobs linked to 600 US companies invested in South Africa, but also many South African companies from mining to manufacturing, including auto manufacturing in particular, to agriculture, citrus, and so forth, who export to the US, as well as South African investors in the US. So we hope it can be resolved quite quickly. We are in constant discussion with our colleagues in the presidency, in the departments of trade, industry, and international relations and cooperation. We know there are frequent discussion with their colleagues in the U.S. Trade Representative's office as well. And we're hopeful that, against a ticking clock, there's something can be done. We appreciate that this is a lot of work. The U.S. has really done a significant about-face with regards to international trade relations and tariffs and so forth with the new Trump administration. And they're basically negotiating with 185 countries in the next few days to conclude issues. So there's a lot of work, to be honest. We hope that there could be some space for extension, because I don't know how it physically is it possible for any country, any government, to manage such a workload within a matter of days. But having said that, I don't think South African companies could compete in the US market, the largest economy in the world, with a 30% tariff hike. Sure. If you look at other countries around the world, the norm seems to be 15% tariff duties on those countries' exports to the US. And I think in exchange, the US is indicating it wants 0% tariff duties on its goods. I think GTIC has put in place quite a positive package, trade package to the US colleagues, which speaks to addressing barriers for US exports into South Africa, but in a way which doesn't harm South African industries. It speaks to addressing the trade deficit with the US by buying US goods that South African industries don't produce, and also requesting that we continue to have favorable access to South African exports. So I think for us, those are positive issues. But I think it is quite concerning. It is quite nerve-wracking, to be honest.
Often, Matthew, governments don't talk in public about trade negotiations. Zane Dungor, our DIRCO Director General, used the phrase yesterday, we're in a kind of non-disclosure agreement period with the United States. And one of the reasons for that is that, just to use an example, if we, say, want access to sell our cars for no tariffs, we might have to accept that American chickens, poultry products can come into South Africa and drop some of our sanitary requirements, for example. So you have different constituencies to balance. But from what you know, do you think our government has been doing a good job in these discussions? And so I need to remind you, we don't have an ambassador in Washington.
Yeah. Look, I think there has been mistakes on all sides. I think it would be naive to say that the US government has been perfect on how it's managed issues, or the South African government has been perfect. But I think our South African government has done its level best, albeit with some mistakes under quite difficult circumstances. I think also what makes our life a little bit more complicated is that there's also the bilateral, the geopolitical wrinkles in the US-South African relationship too, which are not new, but they've been there for some time. And I think you have seen real efforts by government, including by the president when he went to the US 2 months ago. I think our Minister for Trade Industry, Parks, has been in frequent contact with the US colleagues. I think there is a real effort. And I know they have been working around the clock over the past short while to try to address issues. There's always going to be mistakes, without a doubt. There's some things we could have done better, no doubts. And definitely we need to have a very senior leader deployed as an ambassador, ideally by yesterday, because it's fine for government, different departments and ministers, for the president, for business, for labor, for all of us to try to do our bit in trying to reset this relationship in a mutually respectful way. But the fact is we need to have boots on the ground. So we need a strong ambassador who has the confidence of the president. But also we need to reinforce our embassy in Washington, our consulates in Los Angeles and New York. We should actually be expanding our diplomatic footprint because the US is so large. It's a continent in effect. It's a large economy, 50 states. We should actually be expanding our presence there. But I think we do need to give a little bit of space to DTIC, to DIRCO, to manage these issues, have a little bit of confidence in them. We are confident they can put something together. It might be a bit bumpy, but we're hopeful they can do so.
I mean, the other comment by Dango, we were speaking at the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation Winter Dialogue yesterday, and then he made the point that he said that the United States has introduced black economic empowerment into these negotiations, that issue. And I mean, the same's happened in Brazil. There's a trial involving their former president, Jair Bolsonaro. President Trump has introduced that into their negotiations. But what Dango said was that by trying to make BEE a sort of negotiating issue with trade negotiations, the Trump administration was sort of infringing on our sovereignty. And I mean, on one level, I don't see how we can argue with that. What they're doing is saying, if you want to sell goods to us, you have to change your law that only really affects South African people. I mean, how do you see it as COSATU?
Look, it's a difficult thing. You're not dealing with a relationship of equals, to be honest. At the same time, we can't sacrifice our sovereignty. We have a sovereign parliament, we have a constitution, and only parliament can pass or amend laws. But we think, having said that, there are ways to manage things delicately and diplomatically without undermining our transformation journey, which is non-negotiable. Often at times, people, even in South Africa, even members of parliament, don't know that broad-based black economic empowerment, for example, has two models. It has a 30% shareholding option. It also has the equity equivalent option, which many foreign companies have used over the years, including IT companies, including companies from the US. Often we don't communicate those things quite clearly, so people just assume it's a 30% shareholder option. People often are not even aware that the 30% shareholder option actually includes white women, for example. It includes white people with disabilities. It includes workers, including white workers, through the employee shareholder ownership program. So I think at times we also have to be a little bit more surgical on how we communicate issues too, while also maintaining that the fake news, which often informs the body politic, both in South Africa and the US, is not really related to reality. People have made a lot of noise about the Expropriation Act as if it's a blank check to chaos and anarchy, when it's not. It's quite a sober, well thought through, significant checks and balances and clarity, etc. So we also needed to be quite clear in explaining how we do things, but also spend a little bit of time engaging with the US colleagues to understand their issues and finding the equilibrium. I think that's what trade negotiations are. That's what trade unions do all the time with employers. You don't negotiate with your friends. You negotiate with people who have something you want. You might box each other a little bit, but ultimately you try to find what is the sweet spot that everybody can live with at the end of the day.
You sound like a union negotiator who's dealt with bosses and management, Matthew. You box a little bit. Matthew Parks, thank you so much. The parliamentary